Welcome to my podcast. My name is Alex Dove, and I'm an author. The goal of my podcast is to bring you along on my journey and share with you my experiences on writing. It is a peek behind the curtain, if you will, on the occasional struggles and more often the incredible joys of writing. During this time, I'll walk you through my writing practices and share behind-the-scenes secrets. This will allow you the opportunity to understand the style behind my writing and to know a little bit more about the person behind the books. Welcome to my podcast. My name is Alex Dove. I am an author of middle grade and adult suspense fiction. I generally write suspense and thriller novels focused on families torn by tragedy and the difficult struggles faced when that familial bond is threatened or broken. I'm excited to put on my writer's hat and share with you behind-the-scenes methodologies and real-world examples of how I turn words into compelling story. In today's episode, I'm going to discuss the 3-act structure and how it is a framework to help craft stories. More than just explaining this framework, I'm going to illustrate how it frames much of my writing. There are many different frameworks you can follow to craft a strong story. The 3-act structure is simply one of many. Some others include the hero's journey, save the cat, 4-act structure, 7-point structure, and the snowflake method. While this is not an exhaustive list, it does illustrate that the 3-act structure, which I'm going to talk about today, is not the only framework that you can follow. It is one. However, it's one that works for me, and I'm going to show you how I go about using it to frame my stories. At its core, the 3-act structure is broken down into Act 1, which comprises 25% of the story, Act 2, which takes up 50% of the story, and the final act, Act 3, which takes up the remaining 25%. The first act defines the characters and the original setting. It lays out the groundwork for all the characters and the normal world and how they live in their status quo. The second act is a divergence from the normal world. A change has happened in which the main character either has made a choice or is forced into action and cannot return to their normal world. There is conflict and rising tension, which peaks at the midpoint until reaching the cusp of the third act, where the protagonist has a comeback before coming to the lowest point and hits rock bottom. The final act, sometimes called the resolution, is really the point at which the main character pulls themselves up by their bootstraps and takes action against the antagonist. The 3 most major elements in the third act is the third plot point, the climax, and then the resolution, which ends the story. Let me break down the first act into its detailed parts. Somewhere near the beginning of the story, usually within the first 10%, is an inciting incident. This event brings the main character into awareness of a problem that could affect them in some way. It is the moment that shakes up the normal world, indicating that something is about to change. Closely following the inciting incident, and sometimes even overlapping it, is the key event. This event is also sometimes called the point of no return. It is the point where the main character is fully engaged in the next step of the story and cannot return to their normal world. Sometimes the main character is a willing participant, moving through this stage on their own. And sometimes they are forced into action by either other characters or maybe other events. The key event marks the transition from Act 1 into Act 2 and happens somewhere around the 25% mark in the story. This gateway between Act 1 and Act 2 is sometimes called the first plot point. Now, with the first act behind us, let's focus on the next 50% of the book. This is Act 2. It takes up most of the story, and a considerable amount of work has to be done in this act. While the first act held two major pieces of the framework, the inciting incident and the key event, the second act has more. There are three major points to be addressed. There is the first pinch point, which takes place about a quarter of the way into the second act, which is roughly 37% of the way into the story. Then there is the midpoint, which is the high point of action in the second act, and often called the second plot point, and takes place halfway into the act. And finally, the second pinch point, which takes place 3/4 of the way into the second act. The first pinch point is the moment where the antagonistic force or the threat is made clear and acts as a reminder for the protagonist for what is at stake. It shows the protagonist what he is up against, and its purpose is also to help keep tension and conflict in the story so that the story doesn't drag. The midpoint often takes place at the halfway mark of the story and is a critical turning point for the protagonist, often turning them from reactive to proactive. They pull themselves up and they begin plotting a course for success. It raises the stakes and increases the conflict. Now, they're not always successful, but it's where it begins. The second pinch point takes place around 65% of the way into the story. A good rule of thumb is halfway between the midpoint and the start of the third act. The second pinch point demonstrates the threat of the antagonistic force and shows the protagonist what is truly at stake and what they have to lose. It sets up the main character to meet their darkest moments and pushes them forward into the third act. There is often a renewed vigor by the protagonist, whereby they make advances and seeming to create a success before the close of the second act. The third act is one which is the most fun for me to create. It is comprised of 5 individual parts. There is the third plot point, the false climax, the twist, the climax, and then the resolution. The third plot point is sometimes called the Dark Night. It is a point in the story where the successes gained by the protagonist just before the close of the second act are reversed, and the main character is at their worst point in the story. The protagonist has hit rock bottom by either loss, failure, or betrayal. They may feel hopeless and may also question themselves to the point that they want to give up, just give up the fight. The revelation of the third plot point is that it strips away everything for the main character. The main character somehow gains the strength to forge forward after such a dramatic setback. They trudge forward in the face of adversity and surprisingly make enough gains that they see the light at the end of the tunnel. It's enough light that it can be an escape, a win, a way out. The protagonist jumps at the chance to put an end to the drama, only to find out that it was a red herring of endings. This is what's called a false climax. even though their attempts are thwarted once again by the antagonistic force. It is during this point where they often gain allies or grow in power, or the way out is finally revealed. They rise from the ashes and are propelled into the climax. The climax is the final confrontation between the protagonist and the antagonistic force or antagonist. This beat occurs roughly around the 90% mark in the book. The stakes are at their highest, and the situation is usually life and death. The main character must use all the skills they acquired during Act 2 in order to successfully overcome their challenge. So, while the structure simply illustrates a framework for you to build off of, let's recap what I've gone over so far. There are 3 major plot points which span the 3 acts. The first plot point is at the end of the first act. The second plot point, called the midpoint, is in the middle of the second act. And the third plot point is near the beginning of the third act. The first act is comprised of 2 major beats: the inciting incident and the key event, also known as the point of no return. The second act is comprised of 3 major beats: the first pinch point, the midpoint, and the second pinch point. The third act is comprised of 5 major beats: the third plot point, the false climax, the twist, the climax, and the resolution, also known as the denouncement. The one beat that I haven't covered is the twist. It can occur anywhere between the false climax and the denouncement. The key to a good twist is that all the clues should have been laid out throughout the story, but in a way that the reader didn't see it coming. That is what makes a powerful twist surprisingly shocking and satisfying at the same time. A twist can reveal hidden motives, making the reader re-examine what they know. If done right, it flips the script on predictability and surprises the reader. One of the true benefits is that readers think they know a character, only to discover that they really didn't. If you can craft it so that the reader didn't see it coming, then you've done it right. I hope you've enjoyed this session. Join me soon for another podcast, or check out my blog for additional topics. Don't forget to sign up for my newsletter, where members are presented with new information or special offers. You can find me on social media outlets such as X, Instagram, Facebook, YouTube, and TikTok. Remember to watch, like, and subscribe. Check back on my website soon for more content. Thank you for joining me on my podcast. Come back and join me again as I share my writing journey. This is Alex Dove, and until next time, may your pen never run dry, your muse never wander, and your tales never lose their magic.